This is a 2003 Porsche 911 GT2, and it is the very best version of the 996 Porsche 911. The 996 was a cool era for the 911. It was the very first time the North American market got a GT3 model, and the turbo was brutally fast with 420 horsepower. But this was the most special model of all, the King of the Hill. And today, I'm going to explain why. I've borrowed this 996 GT2 from CNC Motors, which is an exotic car dealership here in Southern California that has an enormously wide range of cool cars, from crazy expensive exotics to weird oddball stuff. And of course, this GT2, you can check out CNC by clicking the link in the description below. But even among CNC's massive inventory, this car is really special. These days, Porsche has more GT models than you can count. There's the GT3, the GT3 RS, the GT3 Touring, the 911R, the GT2 RS, blah, blah, blah. And they make as many of them as they possibly can. But back in the era of this car, that didn't happen. You only got one of these if you were a serious performance driver who wanted a serious track car, and Porsche kept supplies really low. They only sold 300 of these in the United States. That makes this car twice as rare as the Carrera GT. And it wasn't just rare, it was also amazing. For this car, Porsche took the turbo's 420 horsepower engine and turned things up a bit for 476 horsepower and 472 pound-feet of torque. Then Porsche ditched the turbo's all-wheel drive system. This car is rear-wheel drive only, which made things a little interesting. This was a really hardcore, serious, track-focused car, and it was probably the very last 911 that truly required immense driver skill and precision and expertise in order to drive it fast and not crash. Anyway, today I'm going to show you the 996 GT2, and I'm going to show you some of the quirks and features of the ultimate 996. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'm going to give it a Doug score. All right, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the 996 GT2 with a little overview of some of the exterior items you can use to tell apart the GT2 from the regular 996 Turbo, and that means starting with the front bumper. The regular 996 Turbo had a fairly aggressive front bumper, but the GT2's comes out like a couple extra inches, I guess to provide more downforce, better cooling. It certainly looks more aggressive, and it's a very distinctive front bumper look if you know what you're looking for. And next up, moving around to the back, you have another big differentiator between the GT2 and the regular 911 Turbo, and that would be the wing. Both cars had large wings, but the 911 Turbo's wing would go up or down depending on what speed you were going. The GT2's huge wing was fixed in place. And another way you could tell apart the GT2 from the regular 911 Turbo is the brakes. All of the GT2s came with Porsche carbon ceramic brakes, whereas carbon ceramic brakes weren't even optional on the 911 Turbo from the 996 era. Now, Porsche did offer carbon ceramic brakes as an option on the 996 Turbo S, but those themselves are pretty rare. Either way, all the 996 GT2s came with them standard. So those are the big ways you can tell apart the GT2, but here's the thing. Anybody can change out their front bumper, and anybody can change out their rear wing, and anybody can paint their brake calipers yellow to match the caliper color of carbon ceramic brakes to disguise their turbo as a fake GT2. You want to know a surefire way to tell them apart? It's right here. No 996 GT2 had a rear wiper, but all 996 turbos, at least in North America, had a rear wiper. So if you're looking at it and it has a rear wiper, it's a turbo. Now, some 996 Turbo people remove their rear wiper because they think it looks better, but there will always be a plug on the back of the car from where the rear wiper was, whereas a GT2 won't have a plug. Of course, if you really want a surefire way of telling apart the 996 GT2 from a regular 911 Turbo, You can just look into the back seats. The 996 GT2 had the rear seats deleted in order to save weight. Instead, there's just a carpeted space back there, and it actually says GT2 in the back. So if you glance into the rear window, that'll tell you everything that you need to know. Now, speaking of glancing into the rear window, if you look back there, you will see a roll cage behind the seats, which is a pretty good indicator of a very heavily track-focused car. Only thing is, that roll cage didn't come from the factory. This car is almost completely unmodified, but this roll cage was added in the aftermarket because Porsche was not allowed to ship GT2 models to North America with a factory-installed roll cage. In other markets, Porsche did put a roll cage in the GT2, but in North America, there's some regulation that you can't have a roll cage in a passenger vehicle that you sell new, so Porsche couldn't include it, so the owner of this car added it at some point. Now, next we move on to the rest of the interior, and we have to start by addressing the typical issue with the 911. People complain about the look of the interior in this car. Personally, I don't really find it so bad. Yes, there is some cheap plastic, which is disappointing, but I always felt that the interior of the predecessor model to this car, the 993 version, was just too basic and bare bones. And at least this car had a little bit more style and a little bit more luxury and features than that model. It isn't perfect, but it also could be way worse, and I've never found it to be as big of a drawback as some people suggest. With that said, there are some rather weird items in this interior. For example, below the stereo, you have a CD storage slot, and not just one, but 4 individual slots where you can place CDs when you aren't using them. And that was far from the only strange thing in this interior. How about the climate control? When you don't have it in automatic mode, when you have it in manual mode, it says manual, but it says manuel, spelled with an E and 2 L's, which is strange. I don't know why they didn't bother to translate that into English, but they didn't. I guess Porsche's thinking must have been, it was close enough so we would understand there was no point in translating it. And they did the same thing with the menu button on the stereo. You can see it says menu E, which maybe is German for menu. That was their decision. If it was similar to the English word, we don't have to make a second button because that would be too expensive. Another interesting example of that is found on the stalk that comes off the steering column that allows you to change this little screen in the center below the tachometer. You can move that stalk up or down, and it changes various different menus to show you various different things. But the thing I like about it is that if you push it forward to go into a menu, you can see the word listed there describing that action is enter, which makes sense. But if you pull it back to go back from a menu, instead of back, they've used the word escape. So if you want to escape a menu, you pull on that little stalk, and that allows you to escape. Another kind of funny translation. Another rather interesting and unusual item in this interior is the cup holder situation, which is very strange. It's above the climate control. You can see there's a little drink logo. So you push that, and a cup holder pops out, which I guess is kind of convenient, but you're not done. Then you pull on this little arrow, and a second cup holder also pops out. Now, this is kind of a bad place for the cup holders because as liquid kind of comes off them, it will spill onto your climate controls and your stereo. It's not where you want them. And obviously, you don't really want them on this flimsy plastic piece that comes like a foot out from your dashboard either, but that's where Porsche put them in this car. Next up, another interesting item is in the middle, and that would be the center console, which strangely enough has a lock. You can see there's the center console lid, and then in front of it, there's a little lock. Now, the reason for that is the early versions of the 996 didn't have a glove box. Instead, they only had that center console, and so they allowed you to lock your stuff into your center console like you would have done with your glove box. Later, they added the glove box back in, and so now they have both. This car has a locking center console and a locking glove box. Maybe the best thing about this center console is the fact that it works at all. You press the lock and it pops right open. This has a 100% failure rate in Porsches from this era, but this car only has 5,000 miles on it, so it hasn't broken yet. And one other interesting thing in the center, this one on the ceiling, you can see you have this little dome light area here, and you can press these switches to turn on and off the dome lights. Then there are these little 2 black ovals. What do those do? I'm not sure. I think they provide ambient lighting, but mostly they just look like eyes from an alien. Look at those. Those are alien eyes inside your 996 GT2 interior. All right, driving the 996 GT2. I have always wanted to drive one of these cars. Wow, this thing is so fast. Man, I love this car so much. Everything about this car is just absolutely fantastic and so wonderfully focused. The gear lever and shift action is truly among the best in the entire car industry. I always felt the 996 got that exactly, absolutely perfect. It just feels fantastic. But the thing that's cool about this car is you got another 60 horsepower over the turbo, and you just feel like you can put this, it just feels that much quicker. Man, I love driving this car. These were really serious cars though. These were really serious cars. These cars they were punishing. They did not forgive you if you made a mistake. Are basically a rear wheel drive turbo, except from this era, before all the stability controls, all the nannies, before PDK. You were alone with your car. In my mind, this is the very last Widowmaker Porsche. I really believe this was it. This was kind of the end in the Carrera GT, and then Porsche was like, okay, we got to tone things down and make these cars more accessible. However, it drives just fantastically, not surprisingly at all. The gear lever, the shift action is absolutely wonderful. The steering feels great, as it always does in these cars. I love the ability to rev match so easily. The engine revs so easily and so freely, and there's just a ton of power. And this car has that old school turbo feel to it. It kicks on pretty high up in the rev range, and then you're going, and you better hope that you're ready for it. The ride is pretty rough, though not as rough as I was expecting it to be. I owned a 996 Turbo, basically the less powerful, more comfortable all-wheel drive version of this. I don't find the ride to be dramatically different from that car. The steering is just absolutely fantastic. Really good steering feel. Very nicely weighted. Perfectly balanced. And the car is just so good. Porsche does such a great job of mitigating rear engine. You know, I'm not obsessed with Porsche like a lot of people are these days. It's become such a brand to just be in love with. But I love this car. Man, this one is really nice. It's only got 5,000 miles. It's clearly in fantastic shape. It feels like it did probably back when it was new, and everything works so great, and it's just a fantastic car. It's really fast, it's really quick, and it does feel a little bit skittish, but that's maybe kind of part of the charm. And so that's the 2003 Porsche 911 GT2. You know, Porsche has really expanded the GT car lineup to the point where they simply aren't special anymore. A third of new 911s are now GT cars. It doesn't really mean all that much anymore, but this car comes from an era before all that. You got one of these and you really truly wanted a track-focused 911. And you weren't just buying a GT car so you could discuss deviated color stitching options with your friends on Renlist. This was a serious car, and I love it. And now it's time to give it a Doug score.
And the Doug score is here. The 996 GT2 performs immensely well given its age, tying the Ferrari 430 Scuderia, which is 6 years newer. I love the 430 Scud, but I do think I love the 996 GT2 more, especially when you consider how much of a bargain the Porsche is relative to all the other ultra-rare Porsches, since you can buy a 996 GT2 these days for $100,000 to $150,000. This car will be a lot more valuable someday, which is a shame because then nobody will drive them, and few cars I've ever driven are more rewarding behind the wheel.